Number 1. Josh. I was in high school in the early 1990s. This was around the time when Nirvana came out, and pretty much changed music and culture at the time. A lot of the kids that I grew up with, my entire life began acting a whole lot different. I guess that happens a lot anyway when we get to high school, but these were some pretty drastic changes. A lot of my friends turned punk overnight. It was odd to see a guy who was one day a preppy come to school the next day with a mohawk. But yeah, that was the last time in history that I can remember culture just completely changing overnight. But it wasn't just people changing the looks and stuff. People drastically changed the way they acted too. I really didn't change a whole lot myself. But I did begin hanging out with some different people, and a few of my own friends changed a bit as well. One of my best friends throughout my life was a guy named Josh. Josh and I had been friends since maybe the 3rd or the 4th grade. He was not really a nerd, nor a jock, nor anything else really. He was just a guy. Really light blonde hair and blue eyes. Like me, he didn't really do a whole lot of extracurricular things. He mostly just hung out, played Nintendo, and did things like that. Josh changed a whole lot when we were sophomores in high school. First really notable thing is that he dyed his hair jet black. That was hard to get used to because his hair was really light before he changed it. He then began dressing differently. He was like me, a t-shirt and jeans guy, up to that point. But then he began dressing like his entire wardrobe had come from Hot Topic or something. He started getting several facial piercings, which I always assumed were against his parents' wishes. Josh also started listening to different music. And what I mean is that he would always comb the music stores to find CDs by bands that no one else knew. It was like he thought it made him special or something, if he was the first big fan the band had or something. Despite the changes though, our friendship never changed. He did start hanging out with other people somewhat. Generally, whoever had a car and some money. He would be in their car and cruising around. But he never stopped hanging out with me. We still got together and played video games and talked and stuff. One night he showed up at my house pretty late at night. My parents had already gone to bed, and he normally didn't show up that late. But I was up and I let him in. He seemed pretty distressed about something, so we went into my bedroom to talk for a bit. I noticed that his arm was bandaged up a bit, but I didn't ask anything about it at first. I was worried that he was high on something, due to the way that he was acting. I don't remember most of what we talked about, but when I noticed that he was bleeding beneath the bandages, I asked him if someone had hurt him. He immediately told me that no one had, but when I asked him how he had hurt himself, he was all too eager to tell me. Taking off his jacket, he showed me the fresh bandages that were absolutely bleeding underneath. He asked if I wanted to see his injury. I didn't know how to respond to that. I just told him that I didn't think it was a very good idea for him to take his bandages off. It was obvious that he was bleeding, and removing the bandages could just make that worse. He didn't listen to me though. Josh started unwrapping the bandages off of his arm. And when he did, I was shocked at what I had seen. His arm was crisscrossed with straight razor cuts. They looked like hashtags, so I knew they had to have been deliberate. And that is when I knew that either he had been cutting himself, or he had someone else cutting his arm for him. Either way, I was disturbed. I asked him about it, and he told me that he had been cutting himself lately. He told me it was a rushed feeling to do it, and he felt flat emotionally a lot lately, and that cutting himself sort of brought him out of that. I didn't want to judge him or to betray his trust in telling me about this, so I wasn't going to tell anyone. But I told him that if he didn't clean the wounds, he would get an infection. I told him I had a first aid kit and could give him some new bandages too. I went to get the kit while worrying about my friend. When I came back to the room, he was still sitting there on the floor in the dim light. I got ready to help him, and reached forward to grab his arm. Then, Josh reached out quickly and slashed me down the forearm with a razor blade that I hadn't even noticed was there. I don't even know if I had felt the pain at first. I was more shocked at first that he'd actually done that to me, and I just looked at Josh right in the face. He had this weird little smile on his lips and a strange look of happiness in his eyes, but that look quickly deflated. Before I could get up and react in any way, Josh got up and he quickly ran out of the house. It was a really freaky moment. I wasn't sure what to do, but I had to get my parents up to take me to the hospital. I didn't know if the blade Josh had used was clean. I didn't want to take any chances. What I didn't do, however, is tell anyone that it was him that had done that to me. Josh avoided me for a long time. It wasn't until a very long time after that where the two of us talked, and he had told me that he had only cut me because he wanted me to get the rush that he felt when he cut himself. When he realized that he had scared me, it freaked him out, and he ran out of the house. He was too scared to confront me, thinking I was upset at him. I don't hold him any ill will for it, but I'll never forget that moment of fear when he grabbed my arm and cut into it like that. Number 2. New path. There is a gas station, a convenience store, that I go to nearly every single day. I walk there, so I do it not really to get anything, but because it is a good midway walk, to get a little bit of exercise. It keeps me going, getting up to do something every day. There is a guy that I now know is homeless, but only assumed it the first few times I met him, and he hangs out right outside of the convenience store. There is a shady little spot in the front next to the propane tanks that has an outlet. I guess the managers of the store allow him and one or two of the other homeless people in our small town to use the outlet in order to recharge their phones. Well, anyway, he stopped me in the front of the store a few times to talk, and although I couldn't really understand everything that he was talking about, I had been homeless once before for a short time, so I know what it is like to not have anyone to talk to. So I let him talk a whole lot to me, while I just worked as a good sounding board. Just recently, he decided to get up and walk with me when I was on my way home from the store, but he suggested that I should walk a different way. I had told him before the area in which I lived, and apparently there was a road that went behind the stores and came out behind another street, which was close to my home. And he told me he would show me how to get to that trail that he was talking about. But the weirdest part is that he didn't walk with me all the way to where the trail was. He walked as far as the train tracks, and then just pointed me the rest of the way. And he was right. It was a much quicker path to get where I was going. It was also more shaded and solitary than walking along the highway, so I found myself enjoying that. I took that way a few times in the day, not really thinking much about it. But it was when I decided to take it once at night that I had a really scary experience. I hadn't stopped to really think about what it might be like walking back there at night. The actual path was really short, and most of the walk was along a pavement road. There were a few homes along the road, so I assumed that there would be some street lamps alongside the road as well. Well, when I crossed over from the little path to the asphalt road, I was a bit surprised at first by how dark it was. And yeah, it was really darker than anything that I could ever recall in my life. Like I mentioned, there were a few houses along the road, but they didn't have any lights on at this time at night, and there were absolutely no lights at all in any of the telephone poles. So this is a downhill walk that was nearly pitch dark outside. I could not really make out where I was walking forward, trying to watch where I was going. Unfortunately, at the time, it hadn't occurred to me to just turn around and go back. I just wanted to get through walking that way, and I figured I would take the normal way home. Well, after a few moments, it occurred to me to use the flashlight on my cell. It wasn't the best light there could be, but it did help me find my way a little better than without. I couldn't really see what was on the sides of me or anything, but it was enough to keep me from stumbling, on or even off of the road. And then, there was some sudden noise off to the left side of me. I jumped and then tried to shine my flashlight over in that direction. Because the light was so weak, I wasn't able to make out what was off to the side, but there was some sort of figure who was stumbling toward me, and he was saying something like, "Give me that! Give me that!" I didn't need to make out who or what it was in order to run, though. I took off like a rocket down the hill, without looking back even once. I ran and didn't stop until I made it to the store, and when I went in, I was startled, and the cashier could tell something was wrong. While catching my breath, I explained it, but when we went outside, there was nothing there. I guess whoever it was didn't follow me, but it was creepy as hell having them come after me in the dark like that. Number 3, Mr. Crabapple. I should start by telling you that I don't defend the way that my friends and I behaved when this happened, but that doesn't make the story any less scary to me. When I was growing up, we lived right on the edge of the rural side of town. We really didn't live out in what I would consider living in the country, but we did live out of town on a gravel road, so it seemed rural to me. There was this older man who lived down the road from us. I don't really remember what his name was, but we called him Mr. Crabapple. I highly doubt that was his real name, though. He did have some fruit trees in his backyard, but as far as I can remember, none of them were crabapple trees. We might have just called him that because he was a grumpy old man, and we were annoying children. I had to be around 10 years old when this happened. In the fall, normally after school, a lot of us kids on the street would be playing outside, and inevitably, we would go and try to steal some fruit off his trees. It was the time of year anyway that they would be ripe and ready to pick. So this was not a week after we started back at school. We really hadn't bugged the old man at all during the summertime, so we went and we wanted to go and steal some fruit off his trees. Normally, we would get him to chase one of us away from his porch, so we could all sneak in the backyard and take fruit. A friend of mine went to the porch and knocked on his door. When he answered the door, the kid began mocking him, which is what we did, and he got angry, came outside, and began chasing the kid around. Of course, the job of the decoy kid was to lead him away from the house, and he did, and the rest of us just ran into the backyard. Well, apparently, we had done this way too many times and he had caught on, so while we were in his backyard trying to get fruit, I felt someone grab me really rough on the arm. I screamed, and when I did, all the other kids turned and noticed that the old guy had grabbed me and begun pulling me towards his house. And of course, kids being kids, rather than try and help me out, they all just scattered. The guy dragged me to his house, slammed the back door behind him. He then took me, threw me down a small flight of stairs into his basement, and then I heard him lock the door. I was terrified. Being only 10 years old, I just worried about what was going to happen to me. I wondered if my friends would go and tell my parents, or if they would just run home and pretend like nothing happened, so they wouldn't get in trouble. It's hard to know exactly how kids are going to behave, but I was not only in this man's basement all by myself, it was more of a cellar, and it was sort of dark and dank, and it was just terrifying to be in there all by myself, listening to the man walking around, who knows what, planning for me. It took a while, and I don't really know how long I was down there in the basement, but I probably cried quite a bit because I was so scared. I did finally hear a knocking on the door, and then there was some arguing that I heard. I was still scared, not really sure what was going on, but then I heard the door unlock and watched it open. My dad was at the top of the door, and he told me to come up the stairs and that we were going home. I ran up the stairs to him quickly. He took me and we quickly left the house. Although my dad was mad at me for tormenting the old guy, he also felt that throwing me into his basement and terrifying me like that was just way too much. One of my friends had gone to my parents' house, but only after his parents made him do it, and that was why I was in the basement for a long time. I did get punished, though, for what I did, but I never bothered that old man again. Hey y'all, Killer Orange Cat here. If you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please feel free to click the subscribe button and bell below, or click the icon of Ichigo the cat that will appear at the end of this closing. Leave me a comment, and share this video with someone you think might enjoy it. If you have an original story you'd like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please email it to the address included in the description. But most importantly, don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.